there, I'm Chian Wen, editor of Asian Pork magazine for Asian Agribiz. We explore ESG goals in this podcast, where my colleague Rajeswari Ramani asked Dr. Chian Wen Chan, a supply chain energy and agricultural analyst, what these goals entail for livestock companies.
Today, I will be speaking to Dr. Chian Wen Chan, a research and policy consultant who works with universities and government bodies in the areas of sustainability. He will be telling us about how environment, social, and governance or ESG goals impact the livestock and food sector. Welcome, Dr. Chen.
Good morning. Thanks for the invitation. I'm really excited about today's session. So let's begin. Typically, for some of the common ESG goals for livestock and farming industry are popular issues like CO2 emissions, nitrogen emissions. In nitrogen emissions here, we also talk about like water pollution, NOx, ammonia, etc. And some of the other ESG goals include the use of, less pesticide, and also reducing the impact and causes of deforestation. One of the other impact that hasn't really been included as part of the ESG yet, but may be incorporated in the future, are things like animal welfare. But a word of caution though, a good ESG scoring card can, ironically, cause further food insecurity of food producers. So what do I mean by saying this? It makes food producers more dependent on imports or go broke for over-reliance on import. In this case, we have good example from Sri Lanka in 2022, where when they go organic farming, they eliminated the use of pesticides and chemical fertilizers. But the impact of their agricultural output drastically reduces. So it makes them rely more on food import for their own internal food security. And they actually went bankrupt after that, because they have to import much more food and they don't have enough money to be able to import more food. In the Netherlands, for example, as well, 3,000 out of 20,000 livestock farms are being forced to close down by the Dutch government just to reduce nitrogen and carbon emissions to meet ESG goals, even if it means producing less feed. So these examples actually goes to show that just because one can reach ESG goals, it doesn't mean those goals would not lead to loss in employment, aggravated food insecurity, and a bankrupted government. So companies need to be really cautious. Am I clear so far?
Yes.
So yes, and therefore, ESG goals should actually be done incrementally, step by step, like a proper A/B test on a small sample size. The reason is that any unintended consequences can then be contained with minimal financial and food security impacts on producers and their customers.
That's quite interesting, Dr. Chen. So, despite these factors that will be involved, setting the ESG goals and that it might negatively impact the company. But how would achieving these goals, can these goals be achieved and benefit the company?
There's no, the answer is not really that black and white here. So let me explain why. It benefits companies to some extent for companies that wants continued access to the G7 and Western consumer and financial markets. So outside of the G7 and Western markets, business continue as usual, with or without ESG, and other perceived benefits are typically espoused rather than measured. And I will explain a little bit more why that's the case. There's basically not enough sample size nor sufficient time frame to adequately report the benefits to the company from achieving ESG goals. And also that beyond accessibility to finance and market of rich and developed countries, the only other benefit for adopting ESG is to look good for consumers. ESG's financial beneficiaries are consultants, rating agencies, auditors, and financiers. However, the costs of ESG are borne by company shareholders and customers of the company by paying more for goods. The livestock product itself does not actually improve in quality nor become even more affordable after ESG is implemented. So yes, this is my opinion on this case.
That's quite interesting because like consumers right now are actually like looking, not only consumers but shareholders are also looking at pushing ESG goals on livestock companies, but it doesn't mean that like it's going to benefit them in return. So how are these
Yeah.
goals going to be audited?
So goals can either be internally or externally audited, whether or not it is recognized by ESG rating agencies in another country. This is why most of the ESG auditing is actually done by the big four accounting groups. In this case, KPMG, PricewaterhouseCoopers, Deloitte, and Ernst & Young. So the list of ESG reporting frameworks include Sustainability Accounting Standards Board, which is SASB for short, Global Reporting Initiative, GRI for short, and in areas of environmental statistics, there's the Carbon Disclosure Project and Task Force on Climate-Related Financial Disclosures. So once ESG has been audited by either one of the big four accounting firms, they are then submitted to ESG rating agencies. The top ESG rating agencies are there are more than these six, but I'm telling you some of these top six include KLD, Sustainalytics, Moody's ESG, which is Vigeo Iris, if I pronounce that correctly, S&P Global's RobecoSAM, and Refinitiv's Asset4, and MSCI. The funny thing, though, is that the same report submitting to each rating agency will have different rating outcome because ESG rating is highly subjective. And there's a link if there's actually an academic resource into it, if you want, Rashmi. The correlation between these ESG rating agencies is only 0.61, while the correlation between credit rating agencies, for example, are 0.99. So that goes to show how subjective ESG can be, because there are independent ESG consultancy and advisory firms, which Bursa Malaysia, with Bursa Malaysia joining the fray in November 2022. However, ESG means doing good. And what it means to do good is actually highly subjective and personal. This is why ESG rating agencies cannot be unanimous in their judgment of what is good. So this is my opinion.
So this means we are not going to get products which are 100% ESG stamped as they are rated differently?
Yes. So there are cases, and there are academic studies done into it. Some ESG rating agencies put more emphasis on the E part of ESG, and some environmental agencies focus more on the S part of ESG. And even within the environmental part of ESG, there are rating agencies that there are rating agencies that prioritize more on carbon emissions, for example, so they give more weighting, compared to, say, like deforestation or carbon sequestration. So yes, this actually highly subjective.
So what you're saying is that it is difficult to get 100% ESG rating, as it not only involves environmental sustainability, but also overarching topics on governance and social issues.
Yes. There are many reasons why to attain 100% report card is very difficult. Firstly, there is always like unintended consequences. So just because you implement one solution that improves a certain matrix of ESG, it will end up, causing like negative impact somewhere else. And even if you have 100% by some miracle that you can achieve 100%, it's could be 100% with one rating agency, but it doesn't happen with another rating agency. there's actually, after this talk, if people want to get reference, there's actually already reference online where one company actually scores quite well in ESG. I can't remember the name of the company from one of the rating agency, but on the other one is just average. So yeah, we have to be, salient on that issue. Yes.
So basically, like livestock companies don't have to like worry so much about ticking all the box is basically what I'm saying.
Yes, livestock. Well, yes, livestock company doesn't have to worry excessively. I think it's more important for a livestock company to work very closely with rating agencies and auditors to minimize the downside of ESG.
Yeah.
And we have to bear in mind that the one that is doing ESG auditing are accountancy firms. They are not familiar with livestock industries. So while they are doing the auditing, I think moving forward, livestock companies sort of have to lead the way as well as to how a proper auditing is done on livestock industry, which can be a bit ironic, of course, customer leading auditors to audit very technical STEM-based industry. Yeah.
That's a really good advice that the livestock industry actually should try to lead the way in ESG goals and how to maybe achieve some of the goals in some areas. So we go on to the next question. Most livestock companies have been around for a long time. So what are some of the hurdles they may face in transitioning to meet these ESG goals, which is what we discussed about right now?
Oh, yeah. So actually, some of the hurdles have already been discussed earlier. So what I mentioned earlier is that, the big four accounting firms are the one doing ESG audit on livestock and agriculture. But anyone who has been working in this sector will know that it's highly technical and scientific. And especially if auditing is done by accounting firms without inputs of scientists or technical specialists, the ESG reporting can seem very incoherent. Which, in my opinion, I think they should be working very closely with universities. In fact, universities should be the one taking the lead doing ESG auditing with accounting firms supporting universities. But I mean, that's just my opinion, of course, due to my experience in carbon auditing prior. And the second point is a lot of people actually talk about net zero, but I don't believe that net zero is possible even by 2050. So what I mean here is because, our agricultural system is actually very, very dependent on hydrocarbons. Why do I say this? Animal feed depends on agriculture, on corn, on soybean, and all this corn and soybean, when they grow, they rely on chemical fertilizers. And the chemistry of fertilizers are dependent on hydrocarbons. So if we are not going to use hydrocarbons, how are we going to produce chemical fertilizers? And if we can't produce chemical fertilizers, how are we going to grow more corn, more soybean meal? How are you going to be able to feed chicken? How are you going to be able to feed salmon or cows, So we are not going to actually be able to have high agricultural productivity. And we can't actually achieve net zero for the agricultural sector. So, Rashmi, I know that, in terms of fertilizer, the chemistry can be pretty technical. I can go deeper into it or, if you want, I can continue moving to the next point. What do you think?
Yeah, I think you can continue moving to the next point.
Yeah. So some of the other hurdles, the third point is like transitioning to meet these ESG goals actually may force some of these companies out of business. They can have good ESG scoring card, but at a cost of reduced productivity, like in Sri Lanka, which I mentioned earlier. And some farms, or maybe not even some, many farms may be forced to close by the central government, in this case, like Netherlands. How successful they are in closing the farms is still an ongoing sort of protest and lawsuits and stuff,
Okay.
So the fourth point is that ESG doesn't actually increase revenue. What I mean by this is that there are studies that ESG could disincentivize this is a mouthful. Disincentivize companies that are adversely affected by it, but they do not necessarily, ESG does not necessarily uh, encourage company to do more good things, because it is actually very costly. So caution should be advised here from overdoing ESG by companies.
Okay.
And some of the other points is that, as BRICS membership, BRICS here, just to elaborate a little bit on BRICS, is a growing economic bloc, which is Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. Actually, they are expected to, their membership is supposed to increase more this year in 2023. Who these members are going to include, we are not really sure yet, but we should know by August this year. So the membership increases, and we have to bear in mind that there's a rapid expansion of trade in the South-South region and the East-South region, where selling ESG STEM products and services may not be as well received by these BRICS Plus member states, especially if it is related to human rights, which is the S part of ESG. So that is something that we have to bear in mind.
This means companies going into the BRICS countries may face challenges.
Correct. Especially if your customers are along the BRICS Plus members. So you can be from Malaysia, you can be from Brunei, you can be from Vietnam. But when you're exporting to these countries, and quite often you need government agencies to approve for the import of foreign products into those countries, there may be issues with those products getting into the country if you are, is ESG STEM, especially if human rights is sort of up there in the label,
Okay, understand. Okay,
so yes, So and so what it means is, and in the livestock, and another thing that I would like to mention is that there could be a bipolar treatment of ESG gatekeepers.
Okay.
And at the moment, there's no real example yet in the livestock industry. However, the bipolar treatment for energy industry has already been documented. In this case, ESG financiers may have polar opposite practices of an industry in different geographical locations. What do I mean by this? So, for example, ESG financiers, they are willing to support coal industry in Germany last year and this year, but they are not willing to support coal industry in Indonesia. So, what this means in livestock industry is that, how are you going to deal with this? How are you going to have like two different set of subjectivity on same issues? This is going to be problematic. Therefore, some of the strategy for livestock company is that they may need to be able to employ more people to do more work without selling more stuff. So one team to serve G7 and Western markets that may want ESG products, and another team to serve the market of the global South and BRICS that may not want Western approved ESG products. So this actually increases your production cost without actually selling more. Yes, and finally, ESG auditors, financiers, ratings agencies, all these stakeholders may not agree on a common definition of ESG. Therefore, for companies that really want to move forward with ESG, in this case, it will be advisable for the producer to pick its preferred ESG financier if it needs financing. And from the ESG financier, they would have their own preferred ESG rating agency to work with. So the livestock company should work with ESG rating agency that is approved by the specific financier that the livestock company would like to work with. And by extension, ESG rating agency would have their own preferred ESG auditor as well, whose methodology is coherent with the ESG rating agency. So yes, these are some of the hurdles and some of the possible solutions to the hurdles that I have just mentioned.
That is some very detailed explanation there. I hope our audience can actually capture some of the very good things that Dr. Chian actually talked about. So, okay, just to finish off, very short. If ESG goals are difficult to be attained, like what we talked about, like for 100%, what would be your advice to the livestock sector?
My advice to the livestock sector, to some extent, that I already mentioned earlier some points, and I will further extend on some of those points. So different companies are going to be different because different companies have different exposure to different markets. So, for example, companies that have a lot of exposure to the rich and developed nations, they should put more resources into ESG auditing documentation, working with the right agencies. And if it is too costly for some, then livestock companies should actually consider diversifying their consumer market. So there is actually a lot of data showing that the rate of trade between the global south and global south with the global east are actually expanding much more rapidly than rich and developed nations. So if we want to reduce the cost of even just maintaining ESG once we have achieved it, then we have to really look into the diversification of the global south market and the global east market. And another important part of the strategy to be able to minimize the negative side effects of ESG is actually also to work very closely with government agencies and government bodies to work with other governments to expand, trades and reduce tariffs, so that we get more exposure to different markets. Thereby, it can help to make livestock industry more cost effective. So these are some of the strategies. And ironically, as I mentioned earlier, we need to be prepared to have a parallel management team, one to deal with ESG and one that doesn't deal with ESG, so that whatever that is we done in one doesn't affect the output of the other consumer markets. Yeah.
That's a very good advice, Dr. Chian. Thank you for telling us today about what the livestock industry should expect when it comes to setting ESG goals, and how they can go about making the right decisions that benefits both their company and customers as well, because we are all affected when it comes to what is actually inside the ESG goals. We hope to speak to you again in the near future.
All right. Thanks, Rashmi, for your time. Speak soon.
Thank you for listening to another edition of Asian Agribiz podcast. Do share this with your industry colleagues and come back to see what other topics we will have in store soon, which will be valuable for you. This is Isa signing off for Asian Agribiz.